Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptee podcast. And have we got a treat for you today? This is a fellow adoptee. We're doing pretty much only fellow adoptee episodes now, listeners, because I know that I enjoy those conversations more. And I figure that if I enjoy them more, you'll enjoy them more. So today I'm joined by M Hendrix. She goes as Molly. Welcome to the show, Molly. Looking forward to this fantastic cracker of a subject that you've come up with.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So we spoke a while ago, probably 2 or 3 months ago now. And before we started recording, I asked what theme you'd come up with, and you said freedom. The freedom to determine our own identity. And I just thought, yes, this is epic. I'm getting goosebumps. Like, because we're trying to empower and inspire with this podcast. So freedom and creation. Yeah, brilliant.
Great.
So, talk about that.
Well, I think I guess I'll say that one of the reasons that I felt that being an adoptee was freeing was because I was adopted by loving parents. And so I grew up in a healthy adoptive situation. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but that was my situation. I often describe my parents as being born to be parents. And then they had the experience. And, this was in the 60s, because I was born in 1970, that they couldn't get pregnant and there were no fertility treatments. And so they adopted. And it was this joyful experience for them. I'll tell you quickly that they always tell this story of how they just waited by the phone for 2 years. And every time the phone would ring, they jump and say, "Is it the adoption agency?" And as soon as they got the call, they were 28 years old. They called every one of their neighbors and they all came over and celebrated. It was this great celebration. I actually talk about that celebration at the end of my memoir about being adopted. Because it was they were such good parents, they were so dedicated to being parents, I had a very positive experience. And one of the things that happened was I felt growing up, they told me immediately I was adopted. There was a book they read about adoption and they put my name in it rather than the character's name. I felt this freedom to become whoever I wanted to be. I felt that because I was adopted and I didn't know who my biological parents or relatives were, I could carve out my own identity. I could look at my parents who I really loved and I could say, are there parts of them I want to emulate? And there are things that I want to do differently. One thing, as an example, as a kid, I was just very creative and I was very interested in reading and books as well as art. And so they saw this talent and they said, "Do you want to take art classes?" And I started taking art classes, I think when I was 4 years old, and started painting at a very young age. Even though I didn't become a painter, I became a writer. And if I showed any talent, they'd say, "Do you want to try it? Because maybe that's your thing." And so not only did I feel freedom, they nurtured that freedom in me. And they said, it's up to you to carve out your own identity, to figure out who you are and how to be yourself. So being adopted was a liberating experience for me. I wish that all adoptees and all children really felt this freedom. I remember growing up that I had a friend who looked just like her mom. And she said, "I don't want to look just like my mom." And there's something freeing about not knowing what you're going to look like. Of course, there's also, it's normal to say, "I want to meet people who look like me," but you can also look at it like it's freedom. You don't know, you can determine what you're going to look like. And so it's just been a very positive experience in that way to shape my own identity and my own path. And I wish all people would do that. The new novel I have coming out, The Chaperone, that main character also kind of rejects the dogma of her society and her family to find herself too. And I think that's a theme in everything I write.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much there. First off, I want to echo your sentiments. So I was lucky with, I got the luck of the draw as well with my parents. Whether they were, and whether I think my mum was born to be a mum, whether my dad was or not. He was an only child. My mum was the eldest of four, so my dad wasn't really a family guy. But they did some fostering before they adopted, and then similar to you, there was the biological impediment to stop infertility. So yeah. But we were lucky, and lots of people don't have that experience. And
Right.
one of the things somebody's called me out on it. A fellow adoptee called me out on it. Probably a month or so ago, was about empathy for others and realizing where they're at, and realizing that they didn't have the same experiences as I did. So I'm kind of like, I'm alert to that to a certain extent. But as I'm thinking back on how I welcomed you on the show, I'm thinking maybe I was a bit over the top on this, like I'm playing it up, and I'm playing up the topic. But I think it's so great to look at this in terms of freedom, and like, maybe if we've got the freedom now, right? Maybe we didn't have the freedom when we were kids. Maybe we didn't have the freedom, but it's never too late. It's never too late to create a new future, is it? So let's do that. Let's create a new future for ourselves, in terms of what we do going forward.
I do think it's really important to recognize that many adoptees had very different experiences, and that not all adoptive parents are good parents, nor should they be parents, just like all biological parents shouldn't be parents. And that, I guess I'm a person who kind of looks at life like life is going to happen, bad things are going to happen, and good things are going to happen. And the important thing is how you respond to it. And if you need help, I mean, I'll be perfectly frank, I have issues from being adopted, from, the trauma of adoption. I have an anxiety problem, and it's always going to be a problem. But I think, and I've been in therapy for it all my life, on and off. I think it's important to say, what can I do to be happy? Or how can I look at things in a way that allows me to find happiness? But I do think it might require a paradigm shift for an adult adoptee who grew up with, if they had a bad adoptive situation, to shift their perspective and say, oh, this could be looked at in a way that I had a freedom that's not available or obviously available to people who grew up with their biological parents. That you look at that there are pros and cons to both ways of being raised. I mean, my husband is kind of like that. He grew up on the west side of Cincinnati, a working class side of Cincinnati, and he didn't feel that he fit in, but he felt trapped. And I just never felt trapped, because I knew I had biological parents and a biological family out there. That meant there were more possibilities available to me.
Yeah. So it requires a paradigm shift, as you say, but we can create a new future going forward. We can. People, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, about hanging out at the bus stop for insights. So I was sharing before we recorded. I was sharing some freedom that I'd found from. And I was talking to a fellow adoptee who's also been on the show before we came on board today. So I was comparing my numbers with Hayley Radke. She got to 1 million downloads before Christmas. I was kind of like comparing my numbers. We're on about 37,000 so far, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, Vin, who's been on the show, done lots of podcasts together, and he said, "Don't confuse what the scale of your impact, the depth of your impact, with the quantity of people that Haley's reaching, right? And I'm doing this. I was talking to Sunny before we came on, and she'd given me a couple of suggestions about the podcast, and it became clear to me in that moment that I'm doing this in the best way I can to catalyze insights. And some people prefer shorter podcasts, but I don't think we get to the depth quickly in a conversation. So I'm now free on the back of that conversation I had with Vin. I'm free from this comparison thing. Now I've known about comparisonitis for quite a long time. You know comparisonitis. It's a game that all the family can play. It's very good on social media. My life's better than yours. Your life's better than mine. It's comparisonitis, and we're comparing what's going on the outside with what's going on the inside, and there's a freedom for me in that insight that I'm doing it the way that I think is going to deliver best for the audience, and I am now free of that. And that happened in a split second. That was a paradigm shift on the basis of something that a coach of mine has been telling me for 10 years. She's tried it in 10 years. Coach, mentor, therapist, whatever you want to call it. She's been telling me for 10 years about this. And I found that freedom because Vin said it in one way. So freedom comes in those little instants, in those moments. That's where it's at. And it may seem like a completely tiny thing, but for me, this comparisonitis has been.
Well, what did the coach say?
What did the coach say?
I have to know.
What did she say that
got you over comparisonitis?
She didn't get me over it. Vin did.
Oh, okay.
Vin did. What did Vin say to me?
Yes, I must know.
Yeah. Don't judge the quality of your
comment.
Impact with the quantity of Haley's.
Okay, that's the one that changed things for you. Okay.
That's
yes, it's true. And it's very important thing, since I'm a writer, to recognize, because it's very easy to look at everyone who's getting a movie or TV deal, or, getting on a bestseller list or an award. Every time the award nominations are announced, you feel that you deflate, and you have to move past that. I mean, I think another thing you can do too is, I know we're far afield here, is to root for your, peers. If you root for them, then it's still happy when they get nominated, right? Or when they get accomplish something. So maybe you can root for other podcasts, right?
Yeah. We do. I try and get other podcasters on the show, and help everybody helping each other. Did you see this thing I came up with? Trauma 1, Adoptees United 10.
I did see it, and I haven't had time to follow up. I've been suffering from vertigo for 6 weeks, so I'm supposed to be off screens, and here I am talking to you on a Zoom screen.
It's a simple premise. So at the moment, I'm listening to The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Watson, and it's kind of long. I'm getting some insights from it, but I'm staying with it. But I was talking to an Aussie adoptee, not Vin, another Aussie adoptee before Christmas. And she said, have you read this Body Keeps the Score? And I thought of soccer. When I think of score, well, first off, body keeps the score, right? Oh, the body keeps the score. It's like my trauma is hidden in my big toe, and someday, sooner or later, it's going to jump out and grab me. And it's keeping the score. It's got a score to settle. Like quite scary for me. But the other thing that flipped to me is I thought about soccer, and I'm not a, I don't really watch much soccer. I'm not really a soccer fan, but I thought about soccer, like the school. And I as I was swimming, I came up with this idea of adoptee, a trauma one, because trauma happened, if we believe in this primal thing. Anyway, trauma struck first, whatever it was. Trauma got the first goal. Trauma goes 1-0 ahead, right? And then adoptees united come back and combine together. Teamwork makes the dream work. We all support one another, right? There's no cliches too crap for Simon to say today. But yeah, adoptees come together as a team, and we trash trauma. We trash it 10-1.
Great.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's as simple as the idea. And we're laughing about it. Instead of like, oh, trauma, oh my God, the body keeps the score. Oh God. No, we're laughing about it. Saying, well, I'm not my trauma. And coming together, we can make it a bit lighter. And we've been lighter, and when we're lighter, we're going to be more creative. We're going to be creative, we're going to have more impact, we're going to come up with better ideas. And yeah.
I mean, when we were talking before we started recording about how, we don't want to be living in an unhappiness, and I don't feel like I've done that as an adoptee, but I still think that recognizing the trauma, I mean, obviously you're way ahead. Your story of the teddy bear and everything, you're way ahead. There are plenty of adoptees who haven't recognized that. I remember I was in therapy when I was 23 years old, and the therapist said, well, the first thing that happened to you in your life was traumatic. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, being adopted. And being, he said abandoned, which he shouldn't have used that word, because my biological mother chose adoption. But he said, it's the first thing that happened to you. It's traumatic. And I did not believe it. And he was a good therapist otherwise, but I said, there's no truth in that. And it took me probably until I was in my 30s or 40s to realize, no, he was right. There is a trauma. That doesn't mean we're defined by the trauma. Now, I will admit, again, going back to some adoptees have a worse situation than I do, but you don't have to be defined by the trauma, and you can work through it. I don't think it ever totally goes away, but that doesn't mean you have to be unhappy. You can be working through it in positive ways. But I think awareness is super important. I don't know how you feel about that. Well, of course you do, because you've had your own journey with it, but understanding that there's a trauma is very important.
Yeah. And it is. And it does not define us. And
right.
And deeper than that, it is not us. We are not our trauma. I'm experimenting with poetry at the moment, and my poetry, yeah,
that's hard. Poetry is so hard.
Well, it's come. I guess good poetry is maybe hard, but it came out of me like easy peasy.
You're right.
You're
right. There's a difference between writing poetry or even fiction and then writing good poetry or fiction. That's true.
Yeah. But I don't care whether it's good at the moment, right? Everybody sucks, isn't it? It's like you've got to do 10,000 hours, Well,
right. Or the whole Anne Lamott, do you know her? Shitty first draft. That everything you write at first will be terrible, but then you'll get better.
Yeah. So the pressure's off, right? The freedom, again, back to freedom. And for me, the metaphor is the metaphor that I bang on about all the time is this the clenched fist. The clenched fist is my metaphor for my trauma, and for our trauma, and the fist is grabbing this diamond. It's obscuring this diamond, and the whole point of that is that the diamond and the hand, our true self, diamond, trauma, hand, they're not the same. We are. I'm separating who we are from how we feel. Who we are not our feelings. We're not our thoughts. What's trauma made of? What's trauma made of? It's made of some pretty shitty feelings about being abandoned, not good enough. And it's made of some thoughts. Like, what else is it? I mean, they're pretty dark thoughts. They're pretty dark feelings. But they're not there all the time. They kind of come and go. You know, the poetry is about, some of the poetry is about that. So I'm just taking the metaphors that I've come up with and writing them into different things. But incredible freedom with that. Incredible freedom. Like freedom to express myself. Like, how many poems I've written before that? One, when I was 12, I had to do it as a classroom assessment. Did a classroom exercise by English. Did I enjoy it then? No. Do I enjoy writing the poetry about adoption? Yes. Yeah. Freedom. A bit of freedom in the day, a bit of a change. You know, I love doing the podcast, but you know, like, I'm going to do some readings of the poetry. And that brings back traumatic memories, because when I was 8, I was at the front of the class reading The Borrowers. You remember there's a book called The Borrowers, a kid's book for the borrowers. And for some reason, I couldn't tell my teacher that I was that I needed to go to the toilet. I ended up peeing my pants. I was 7 or 8. Yeah, weird shit. Now, is that to do with adoption? Who knows? But like, so I'm not great at reading the poetry out, because that's still stuck in my mind somewhere. But do I let that bother me? No. It's really freeing that I can tell you that, you know, I was so ashamed about peeing my pants when I was 7 or 8, whatever it was. I'm saying 7 because I think it's kind of okay at 7, and 8 it's not. You know, like it's nuts where we go to, but freedom.
Well, and I think this is also where we go back to the awareness is important, because I mean, it's actually not that different than someone who isn't adopted, that you have an awareness of, this is what my life is. And therefore, you know, if I'm an 8 or 12-year-old, you know, peeing my pants accidentally in school, you know, there might be a reason that isn't because I'm a flawed human being.
Yeah.
There might be something else going on, you know, on another level in my body. Or, you know, I once had a therapist tell me that if you have something difficult going on in your life, and then you do something that requires coping, all your coping might be used for the other thing that's difficult, that's just there temporarily. And so the thing that you normally deal with, you can't deal with, because your coping mechanism is used up in another way. I think that's really important. I do think it's great that you're writing, because I think writing is one of the best therapies you can do. And I really believe everyone should write about what they're going through to work through it. I want to say one more thing about the jewel. I love that you said there's a jewel inside the fist, because one reason I think it's important to recognize adoption as like, or being an adoptee as something distinct, is because there is prejudice and there is misunderstanding about adoption. People will tell you you're less than, or your relationship with your parents is less than theirs. And so I think it's important to know that that is based on misunderstanding and prejudice. And that what my parents taught me was that you're adopted because your biological mother cared more about you than she cared about herself. That's what I was taught. She loved you more than she loved herself. And we loved you more than we could, even a child we had biologically, because we went through all this trouble for years and years to get you. So when I was growing up and kids would say to me, "Oh, you're weird, you're adopted," I would say, "Oh, no, you're wrong. My parents told me I'm special." And so for some reason it was Teflon. It just bounced off me when people tried to bully or, treat me poorly because I was adopted. It never stuck. And I feel like that's a great lesson you're telling people, that there's a jewel inside the trauma, because there is. And that's, my identity, but also my relationship with my parents. So, and I know I'm lucky in that regard. But I love the jewel inside the fist.
Yeah. Thank you. I love your Teflon.
Yeah.
I had a big realization last week, another kind of like a freedom thing. So how do I press this? How do I express this? We don't think that we, as in non-adoptees, right? A lot of adoptees think. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. They think a lot of adoptees think that non-adoptees can't understand us. Okay. So why do we think that we can understand them? Why do we think we can understand non-adoptees?
Good question.
Why, like, and why are we putting our happiness on hold before they stop?
That's a good question.
Us? You know, like, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it's like any other group that's not in the majority. I mean, adoptees are not the majority of the people in the world. They're in the minority. So we see biological families depicted in film, literature, and television everywhere, and art. And so we feel like we know them better because they're depicted so often. But you're right. It's a good point. Maybe we don't fully know their experience.
Well, nobody can know. Every experience is different. Everybody's experience is different. Everybody's experience changes over time. That's one of the things I'm getting from Bessel van der Kolk is how unreliable our memories are, how changeable they are. You know, I'm sure you'll have heard of this because being a writer, you know, this unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
Unreliable narrator. You know,
right.
Like when I did the webinar about whole healing the primal wound, we looked at, well, what is the primal wound? Well, yeah, it's a metaphor. Yeah, it's a belief, or yeah, okay, it's a trauma. Well, what's the trauma made of? Trauma is made of thoughts and feelings. Well, trauma made of, but thoughts and feelings come and go, don't they? I mean, some of them stick around. Some of them are really heavy. Some of them stick around, but they're not who we are. We're always, there's always me. There's always you. We're always essentially, you know, this idea from great guy Rupert Spira that we are awareness. We are the screen on which our movie of our life is playing out. Sometimes we are the victim in that movie. Sometimes we're the villain in the movie. Sometimes it's a documentary. Sometimes it's a rom-com. Sometimes it's a disaster zone. Sometimes it's a horror show. But the screen of awareness that we are is unchanged. That the screen at the multiplex isn't slashed by Freddy Krueger, or Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. Yeah, I love that. Now, I do want to ask you something, if I could. So you said that trauma is thoughts and feelings. Do you think, though, that there's also chemicals? Because I've done research into what happens when you live in an orphanage, and I lived in an orphanage when I was a baby, which was so much more common in America when I was born. It doesn't really happen anymore very much. But, you know, living in an orphanage does affect your cortisol levels. And then, have you read about this?
Yeah, I've heard about this, and this is where my theory goes off. Actually, but you're completely correct to do this. You know, the body keeps the score. The body keeps the score in in cortisol, as you
Right.
say. The body
Right.
keeps storing in chemicals.
Right.
And so what happens to me, I was in one of my poems, I talk about being gut punched. So like I was in a altercation with somebody on Facebook the other week, and I felt gut punched. I felt like punched in the gut by a comment, by a threat of rejection, a threat of expulsion from the group. So there's clearly some chemicals going on. There's some stuff going on at play. Yeah. And yet, you know, like you can have there can be an adrenaline burst, right? And it fades.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely how cortisol feels. And that's why fight, flight, or fight kicks in.
Yeah. But it fades though. It fades.
Oh, yeah.
It fades. So this is why I get I feel I get in danger of being very philosophical here, but
please go ahead.
The essence of who we are is unchanged. You know, the truth never changes. There is a difference. I got this from Rupert yesterday, listening to him. The difference between our essence and our experience. Our essence and our experience. So the chemicals are in the experience bit. The cortisol's in the experience bit. The thoughts are in the experience bit. The feelings in the experience bit. The trauma's in the experience bit. But the essence of who we are is ever present.
That's really beautiful. I love that. And I think it's true. And it might be what made it easier for me to have the view that being adopted is a type of freedom and gives you liberties that you might not have otherwise. I mean, I also think it's the same thing with the cortisol thing. You also you can have an awareness of it, which I think is important. And it helped me because then I understood the anxiety problem I have, which, you know, doesn't control my life, but I know it's there. And when I understood that might have a chemical root, I was able to let go of it so much more easily because I thought, okay, it's not just me. Some of it is the experiences, as you said. It's not my essence, it's my experiences. And I don't have to, or I can say that's just in the past. Even though I'm never going to be I'm not going to be a person who's free of anxiety. I can cope with it a lot more easily by saying, oh, that's what that is. Because there's an explanation.
Yeah. You see, so for me, like anxiety, there's being worried and then being worried about being worried.
Which is worse for you?
Well, this is from a mentor of mine, a guy called Michael Neal. Well, we become a moron, as in we've got more on our mind. So what you described was, well, the diagnosis gives you freedom, essentially. Mm-hmm. The understanding gives you freedom. So there's some people say, well, primal wound. That you know, I looked at this on the webinar. I'll put a link in the notes in case anybody hasn't seen it. Done incredibly well. 1,200 views in a day.
Wow.
So yeah, I talked about the diagnosis the primal wound being a diagnosis, and that diagnose, it gives. So it's a diagnosis, it's a metaphor, it's a belief system. Like, the diagnosis gives us. It gave me a freedom, right? So I read the book and I thought, I can. There's a donkey. I can pin all my woes on that thing. This explains everything, So there was a freedom. There was a freedom in
Yes.
finding it out. But then it became more like became more like sandbags holding me down. Like when they're doing a balloon. Yeah, there's a basket. There's a basket under the balloon, and then they have sandbags in the basket of the balloon, the hot air balloon, and they throw them out to take off. Well, the primal wound to me felt like it was somebody throwing sandbags into the balloon that were stopping me soar. That's how it felt to me. So initially there was a relief, and then on the back of it, and then after that there was a feeling of heaviness, and then when I saw through the heaviness, then there was soaring. Like it was like a big jump. So anyway, enough about me. You were talking about the fact that you had your understanding was this is a good thing. Your belief system was such that the other kids couldn't upset you when they tried to take the chicken. So you had that your belief system, your inner sense of resilience based on your belief system made you Teflon. And this is incredible for me, because I before I came into the adoption space, I spent 7 years putting Teflon coating on kids.
Oh, wow.
Or I didn't put I made them see. So you saw your own Teflon for yourself. You and well, looking back on it, you could see it. Look, probably at the time. Did you think, well, this is bouncing straight? These nasty comments are just bouncing straight off, right?
I did, because my parents had just layered it for years and years and years. Like I said, they read me that book, The Chosen Baby. And I knew it before I could read. I knew the book by heart. And so it was just drilled into me over and over. I mean, I think that you're born with some things, and maybe I was born with more resilience and openness and honesty than a lot of other people. So yes, I just thought that's absurd.
So the penny had dropped for you through repetition and through insight, and however it was, or maybe an innate resilience that was bigger than us. But the penny had dropped. You had seen your own Teflon. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words could not hurt you, right? As the old rhyme. Now, there's a lot of kids that don't see that, and so
I agree.
They don't see that. So I spent 7 years pointing kids to the Teflon that they already had, and they saw it like in an instant. Like it was incredible. Wow. Incredible. And I did a webinar on this topic last night, actually, called Bully Proof. So make your adopted child immune to bullying.
And so I feel like one of the most important things is talking about it. I talked with a friend of mine last night. I went over what I wanted to talk about with you, because she's an she adopted her children. And I just wanted to see if there was anything from her point of view that struck her as just totally out there. And there was nothing. But she said that a lot of adoptive parents still don't tell their children right away that they're adopted. and it causes massive problems. And to me, that's the number one thing, is being open and honest about what's going on. And that's not all of it. That's just the beginning. But if you don't have that foundation, if you, I don't know. I was surprised to hear that their adoptive parents still pretending that their children are biologically theirs. I didn't know that happened.
Nobody likes surprises.
Yeah.
They're very good in drama. If you're watching a TV show and they like to, they like to bring surprises, because surprises bring drama. They bring upset and they get people going at each other. And people don't like surprises of this nature.
So what is it that you tell the children? How do you teach them to be Teflon? Adopted children?
Well, it wasn't adopted children specifically. It was the general population.
Okay.
So that feelings are an inside job.
Okay.
That feelings come from thoughts, not from the outside world.
Oh, it's so true.
But parents, adults, and including me, right? Including me, I don't always remember that, and it took a long time for me to see that for myself. Kids, they are open, and they see the truth more instantaneously than we do. They've got less conditioning. They're more open. You use the word more open. They're more open to seeing a new truth, and the truth sets us free, right? The truth sets us free. We want truth, the truth of who we are, the diamond underneath the
right. And I think that's one of the reasons that adoptees have this inherent or even primal need to know where we come from and who we are. And that is a healthy need. And, it's not always one that can be resolved. Sometimes you have that need and you can't find out who your biological family was, but I do think it can be satisfying and make you feel more whole. Maybe even just recognizing that need exists helps you feel whole.
Yeah.
Skin hunger. It's not. What'd you say?
Have you heard of skin hunger?
No.
Skin hunger. Yeah, it's a podcast, an episode. It's like the need for skin hunger, like the need to see somebody that looks like you.
Yes. And yeah. And I think knowing that that's a normal feeling as an adoptee is very important. And also, because I had such a positive relationship with my adoptive parents, I always felt kind of guilty. Like I shouldn't want to find my biological parents because my adoptive parents are so loving. But you shouldn't feel guilty about that. It doesn't reflect on your relationship with your adoptive parents. It actually just reflects on your humanity and your human need to know who you are.
Yeah. I heard something about what was it I heard? I've just translated it. I've put it with your freedom thing. So here's the thing. Freedom from trauma and freedom with trauma. So freedom from trauma is us fighting our cortisol reactions, our feelings, our anxiety, our primal wound, whatever you want to call it, our insecurities. We're fighting it. And the fighting it just keeps the thing in place. What we resist persists, yeah? It just gets bigger. We're becoming a moron, as Michael Neal would say. We've got more on our mind. It's not just my worry. It's my worry about my worry. My worry about my worrying about my worrying. And I've been on all these courses. I shouldn't be worrying. When will I get to the end of the worry? Yeah. So this is freedom from trauma versus freedom with trauma. Yeah. I've felt some trauma. Yeah, I feel some trauma. Yeah, I had a reoccurrence. It was in a Facebook group for adoptees, and I made an error. And somebody, and then I didn't apologize. Well, and I felt this visceral reaction. I felt this expulsion. I felt that the other person was calling for me to be expelled from the group, and I felt a visceral fear of expulsion. Now, is that adoption, or is that just the fact that we're mammals and we like to hang out with other mammals? We see those documentaries, we see those nature documentaries, and the antelope at the end, the slow antelope is the one that the lion's going to get. There's freedom in the herd. That's our whatever reptilian brain, whatever. So, is that human, or is that adoption?
Now, or is it both?
Or is it both?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like it's both. I love this idea of freedom. You said freedom with trauma, correct?
Yeah.
I love that, because I think that might define what I'm talking about. That I can understand that, living in an orphanage as a baby created a higher level of cortisol in my body. And so my body in an anxiety inducing situation produces more cortisol than someone who didn't live in an orphanage or didn't suffer trauma at that young an age. But I can understand that and therefore live with it. So I think you nailed it. That's how I feel. That is maybe the essence of my experience as an adoptee, that I have freedom with the trauma, and that because I understand it, it allows me to move on and be content and happy.
And that Bessel van der Kolk book, Freedom, A Body Keeps a Score, right? He hasn't mentioned adoption yet, and I've been listening to it for 8 hours.
Really? See, and we were talking about this before we started. I will say that I do think that this is a group that is not yet recognized as a distinct group, whereas other, victims of PTSD from war, or especially, and thank goodness we now understand what immigrants go through when they're forced to move and how difficult it is. I would love us to all be working towards educating other people in the public to say, being an adoptee is a part of being in a distinct group as well. And we have our own distinct perspective and needs, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that we are less than. It means we have our own way of interacting with the world.
Yeah. I was listening to something. Oh, it's the Bessel van der Kolk book. He was talking about, PTSD. Origins of PTSD, and the fact the British government banned the word shell shock and banned the diagnosis.
Really? When was that?
In the First World War. In the First World War.
What was their reasoning? Do you know?
They don't. He didn't go into the reasoning. The Germans did the same. So the reasoning, I believe, was that it would be bad for morale.
Oh, okay. So they wanted to.
That's what I'm guessing the reasoning was. They wanted to deny it they wanted to deny it because they thought that that people would jump on a bandwagon, and on that bandwagon there would be lots of bandwagons all heading away from the front. Where the fighting was happening. People would jump on the bandwagon. Yeah.
So they were doing the opposite of what we're talking about, which is having an awareness of who you are and what it means to be who you are. In our case, adoptees, So rather than promoting awareness and understanding so that you can live and have freedom with it, they wanted you to live in a basically to be ignorant.
They wanted to push it under the.
Yeah, they wanted you to be ignorant of what was going to happen.
So yeah, and it's quite important, you know, this stuff takes time, right? So somebody told me it took 200 years, 2,000 years, something, when like
That's a big difference.
Flat Earth. It is a batter. I'm hesitating because I'm feeling pretty stupid, really, that I don't.
That's okay. I'm just teasing.
Yeah. It took 200 years. It was 200 years. It took them 200 years for the majority of the people to believe that the world was round.
Oh yes, I think it was 2000. I think it was a long time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So things change. You know, that it takes a long time for the herd to change. And you know, you were talking with something. You were talking about this about the majority and the freedom to do your own thing. So at the weekend we get the Sunday Times newspaper, the London Sunday Times, which is read by like 2 million, 3 million people. It's the biggest circulation newspaper in the UK out of a population of 70 million, and it's a quality newspaper. So you know, it's not like a tabloid, right? I mean, they do have silly headlines and things like that, but it's an in-depth, serious newspaper. And they put this. There's a style section, a magazine section, which is mainly about women's style and fashion and stuff like that. And the title was this Sunday was how to wear jeans in middle age.
Really?
And I'm just thinking, do we need to be told?
No.
To that extent. This was the title. This was the title on the front cover of this separate supplement. And I'm just thinking, this is thinking First World War and you know and the propaganda and the mass and you know like the groupthink and the groupthink about and the groupthink in the adoptee space. Like there's a lot of groupthink, you know, and that's what I was getting at earlier on when saying like they don't non-adoptees can't understand us. Well, how can we understand them? We can't if we can't understand them. If we can't understand them, we can't blame them, can we? You know, then they're doing the best that everybody's doing the best that they can. We're all doing the best that I can, given the thinking that's in our head at the moment. You know, we're doing the best that we can. And so how on earth are we supposed to understand adoptive parents? How are we supposed to understand, you know, people asking us strange questions. This is a cultural thing that's becoming clear to me, actually, between the UK and the US, is that I hear stories of people from adoptive parents, from adoptees, being asked stuff like, you know, what about you real parents, or you know, those sorts of strange comments that people come up with. And there seems to be far less of that here in the UK, in my experience, or in my opinion.
Oh, okay, good.
You're a bit. There seems to be, we're a little bit, less direct, shall we say, or more tactful as our culture. And this is a massive oversimplification, right?
But I think there's some truth in it, and especially when compared to Americans.
And yet, you know, you're more happy talking about feelings. That's why we have more adoptees and more people from the States on the podcast. You're more there's less stigma around around shrinks and counselors and coaches and mentors and stuff like that. People in Britain will say, "Have you not got any friends?" Do you know what I mean? It's that. They're a bit too emotional. Those Americans, they're oversharing. Do you know what I mean? So there are some cultural differences on a big agenda. But
Sure.
back to freedom. Is there anything else that you want to share on the freedom topic?
I think that it's interesting you just mentioned that we don't know what it's like to grow up as a biological child raised by a biological parent, because that's the larger issue I think about, is that this isn't something just for adoptees, adopted children. It's also something for all children to understand. I learned it because I was adopted and told, we don't know who your biological parents are or where you came from, but we can also teach children that they should all feel that way. They should all feel that their identity is open to them to shape any way they want. And so it's actually really wonderful to think that something I could learn from being an adoptee, which is considered, not as common as being a biological child, that we can apply that to other children and then they can have better lives too.
Yeah. You were talking a lot last time when we spoke about empathy, about trying to understand other people.
That's my big thing.
Yeah, and this cultural thing is quite different. And so you could say, well, adopt the cultural. We've been talking about UK versus US culture, but you could also have the kind of like adoptee culture versus non-adoptee culture.
Right.
I'll give you a silly example that happened to me yesterday in terms of culture. I was going into a coffee shop and there was a Deliveroo guy coming out and he was just culturally different, right? But I took it as rude. He kind of barged past me. In a very non-British way, and I said to the girl on the counter, "Does that guy work for you?" She said, "No. He's a Deliveroo driver. He doesn't work for us." And she told me where he came from. But there was somewhere in Eastern Europe or something. But there was a cultural difference, in terms of manners. And I was putting my British manners. I was judging him through the lens of my British manners.
Yes,
and so I was not. I was like slightly irritated by it. But then you realize, okay, it's just me. I'm creating that.
Right. You kind of have to check yourself. And yes. So empathy is the most important thing to me in the world. M stands for Molly. My pen name is M Hendrix, and it stands for Molly, but it also stands for empathy, because it's my guiding principle. And that's one reason I want adoptees to be working towards being recognized as a group, because until people understand who we are, they're not going to be able to extend that understanding to empathy. But we all now live in a world where we understand we do have to check ourselves when we make assumptions or judgments that are incorrect or wrong-headed or not helpful, right? And I would like us to try to make people more educated about adoption and the experience. I mean, that's why I wrote the memoir about it. And what I learned is that I thought my experience was so unusual in the adoption world. And it was everyone who's read the book and has written to me and said, oh, it's the same thing that happened to me. I have learned, oh, this is a common experience, and our experiences can be used to educate and therefore create more empathy. I actually believe, I think it was Richard Russo. I don't know if you know him. He's an American writer, a novelist, who said that the purpose of literature is to engender empathy. And I believe that. That's why I write books. And it's not just literature, it's sharing stories, whether it's on a podcast, in a novel, in a movie, a TV show, sharing your stories creates empathy. And so that's why I do this.
Yeah. Beautiful. And listeners, as always, I urge you to check out the show notes for every episode, because there's links in there to Molly's books and Molly's website, socials and stuff like that. So check out what she's doing. Check out the memoir. Yeah. So I love that. Yeah. M for Molly, M for empathy, and M for memoir as well.
That I write fiction mostly. That was a one-time thing, writing a memoir, I think.
So is there anything else you'd like to share before we bring it in?
No, I just think that what you're doing is very important. And I'm so glad that you understand how much more important quality is than quantity, because there is a really high quality of work that you're doing here, reaching people. And so thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you to listeners for staying with us to the end. We will speak to you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.